Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and today we'll be reacting to this video from the Comeback Kids, Gaming's Biggest Tragedy, The Rise and Fall of Diablo 4. This video's been getting some traction. I watched the first minute or so. It is exceptionally well produced. A lot of effort went into making this video. I know, as someone who edits videos, I can tell a lot of time was spent on this. Now, a quick note on my style of reaction video. I like to focus on being ethical and complying with fair use. So that means transformative. That means that this video is not going to be a watch party. This is my reactions, focusing on my reactions to what he is saying. So it's going to be mostly me talking, and I'm not showing his video in full. So if you would rather go watch his video first, I encourage you to do that. Link in the description. Otherwise, I encourage you to watch his video after this video.
On June 6th of 2023, Diablo 4 officially launched, and it was an instant home run success. Twitch was booming, the concurrent player base peaked at almost 7 million players. Everybody thought this was the game they were going to call home for a while. Now, there are as little as 400 people watching Diablo 4 on Twitch. Players are forced to complete world boss.
So, real quick, Twitch numbers are not necessarily an indication of a game's health. That said, I think there are multiple vectors of evidence suggesting that Diablo 4 player numbers have dropped dramatically. So, again, I've staunchly held for years that you can't just look at Twitch numbers and say, oh, a game is dead. Because some games just are better for Twitch and some aren't. Some games are better for Twitch streamers, some aren't. But Twitch numbers, YouTube numbers, anecdotally, everyone's saying their friends have stopped playing. They log into their clans. There's like 1/10 of the people there, or they're their only person in the 100, member clan. I was at Gamescom. I spoke to dozens of people, and dozens of people told me, yeah, D4 kind of disappointing after you've, played it for a couple of months, or after you're like level 70 plus. Now, I'm only bringing this up to say, because people have pointed to Twitch numbers for many games in many instances, that is called a hasty generalization fallacy. You can't just point to Twitch numbers and say a game is dying. Again, though, I'm not saying the conclusion is false, just that it's not enough evidence. But it sounds like this guy is building towards something.
And player population dropped by over 99%.
Well, source? I'm not disagreeing, but we have no way of actually getting these numbers other than anecdotally. Like 99.3 decrease in player count, that's nothing. That's not, there's no way we have that actual data. Why is he saying this?
The economy between Eternal and Seasonal realms have been destroyed by rampant bugs.
True.
Season 1 content was an absolute disaster, and Season 2 looks to be the exact same.
That's a little harsh. I think the content of Season 1 was solid. It wasn't altogether enough. It was, what was expected of Season 1 was more than what we got, but I don't think what we got, I would call it disastrous.
How did this happen? Where did this once beloved franchise go wrong? And what will it take to fix it? Today I'm going to explore the timeline of Diablo 4 from pre-release to what the game is now. Grab a cup of coffee and settle in, because this is the complete timeline of how Diablo 4 became the biggest disappointment in gaming history.
So he's starting off giving some background on Blizzard Entertainment and the Diablo franchise, Blizzard's importance to the gaming scene, Diablo's importance to the gaming scene. He talks about how Diablo 2 revolutionized the ARPG, and he's pointing out how D2 is still relevant today, thanks to how important and revolutionary it was.
By the time Diablo 3 went into production, a whole new development team was in place, and in many eyes, this time period was the beginning of the end for Blizzard Entertainment.
So yeah, Diablo 3 was, for those who don't know, mostly made by new people. Blizzard North made Diablo 1 and 2, formerly Condor Games. We're not going to go into the, I'm not going to get into the entire history, but basically all those people left Blizzard, and Diablo 3, while at first it was being worked on by Blizzard North people, after they all pretty much left, barring maybe a couple exceptions, the game was rebooted and effectively entirely made by Blizzard, who had never made an ARPG before. Blizzard North being a separate studio that was acquired by Blizzard to specifically make Diablo 1, Diablo 2.
The auction house doing more harm than good gave you the opportunity as a player to spend hundreds of dollars of your hard-earned real-life money on items in the game. And this benefited Blizzard greatly because they took a $1 cut on every successful auction. And with the game's insane levels of progressive difficulty, it meant that if you wanted to progress in the game effectively, the perfect gear was just in wallet's reach for nearly 2 years until it was finally removed.
Yeah, alright, so he's talking about the auction house in Diablo 3. I feel like the way he's painting this is that it was a feature designed to make money. I don't think that was the main motivation of the auction house after having spoken to devs on the team at the time. God. I really don't want this video to be me defending Blizzard or me defending Diablo 4. I understand that's how it's already coming off. I like to ensure that when criticism is leveled, it is true and accurate criticism, because if just you paint anything they do in a negative light, then criticism becomes meaningless. So the removal of the auction house, I believe, absolutely saved Diablo 3. I'm not advocating for the auction house, but why did this thing exist? Well, the reality is it already existed. For Diablo 2 was just as pay-to-win as Diablo 3. It just wasn't supported by Blizzard, right? There was always a gray market. There's always D2 JSP. There's always been places where people would spend real money to get items in game. It's just that it was, again, this black market, gray market, whatever you want to call it. So Blizzard's like, okay, instead of that happening, let's make a secure environment. And the former game director of Diablo 3, Jay Wilson, who's no longer with Blizzard, hasn't worked with Blizzard for years. He was effectively made a pariah in the gaming community. He has no reason to defend Blizzard anymore. He came out and said, we never expected to make much money on the real money auction house. It was just a way to have a secure environment for trade. Because some of the biggest complaints in Diablo 2 were gold sellers, duping, exploits, all that stuff. So again, not saying the auction house was a good idea, but just curtailing any potential argument that's going to be that was Blizzard's way to make money. They said that it didn't make that much money compared to their other revenue sources, so it wasn't a big money driver for them. Again, though, the best thing to happen to Diablo 3 was Loot 2.0, the removal of the auction house. There were a lot of problems with the auction house. And even putting aside the real money auction house, just the base auction house was problematic because it was vastly more efficient, hour per hour, to just play the auction house to get better gear than to play the game. Unless you were an absolute top blaster, if you spent 1 hour on the auction house, that'd do more than 10 hours of playing the game to get items that you are looking for. And the most effective way to power up in a game should be by playing the game, not by playing the auction house.
It took many years of innovation to bring Diablo 3 to where it is today.
True.
DLCs, seasons being implemented, greater rifts, and non-stop updates for nearly 10 years. A game with a disastrous launch and some fundamental problems with its core design has grown into one of Blizzard's most long-lasting and beloved games that is...
I wouldn't say D3 is one of their most beloved games. I don't think it has that reputation. Long-lasting, sure. Despite what people say, D3 has... up until D4 maintained a pretty decent population. Again, much higher than the Twitch numbers would suggest. The fact that, you know, people have continued to be able to run businesses off of Diablo 3 content to this day says something. I certainly don't think it's one of their more beloved games. I mean, I guess it built up its own player base over time. But yeah, Reaper of Souls absolutely saved Diablo 3. The thing is, while Diablo 3 was poorly received at launch, I still think it maintained a healthier player population than Diablo 4 has maintained. I think Diablo 4 was better received at launch for the first month. I think D4 was vastly better received than D3. I think what's happened now is, as most people have reached the end game in D4, level 70 plus, now all the complaints are coming out and the player numbers are dropping off steadily, whereas D3, the problems were more evident, I think, from the very start, and I feel like, this is just anecdotally, I feel like D3, while there were the complaints, it felt like more people kept playing it. And I think part of that is just a symptom of the times. We're a decade later. there's more competition, there's more alternatives out there, there's more other ARPGs that people could go play, more other games, more Netflix, more streams, more everything entertainment-wise, that people just don't have as much patience anymore for something that isn't meeting their expectations in every way.
It's currently being played and viewed as much as Diablo 4.
Again, this is... D3 just had a new season launch, right? All of us streamers are bouncing to D3 because the new season launched and we're in a dead period of D4. Not a good argument to make. Because believe me, D3 is also dead. Its numbers right now aren't doing too hot either. You go look right now, we're like a week or two now into the new season of D3. It's not pulling 12K anymore. A lot of us D3 streamers that went back to streaming D3, we're now bouncing off D3 already because D4 has managed to kill interest in D3 as well.
Now, with 3 games in the franchise under its belt, Blizzard was looking to announce Diablo 4 at BlizzCon. Trying to build excitement for yet another Blizzard game is something that seems very grim in today's world.
True.
Once the announcement trailer dropped, Blizzard was officially on the clock from the fans. And then, disaster struck.
More than 1,500 Activision Blizzard employees are calling for the resignation of the company's CEO, Bobby Kotick.
The company began to truly unravel midway through the development in 2021, with a major lawsuit against Activision Blizzard being filed for a near 2-year running investigation into the company from the state of California. Hundreds of employees at Blizzard walk out to protest against this frat boy culture and even more quit or step down from the company, leaving everything in disarray. And Diablo...
Yeah. Blizzard had just basically gotten their first win in a while with the D4 announcement at BlizzCon 2019. And then, yeah, probably the biggest... definitely the biggest scandal in Blizzard's history happened.
Diablo 4 was no exception to this. The ongoing sexual harassment lawsuit took a major toll on Blizzard, and the company...
Whoa, hold on, don't put... Okay, just to clarify here, these pictures are not all people who were let go because of allegations. We just want to make that clear, because there might be some confusion that this is a hit list of evil perverts. Some of them, yes. I don't like how he's formatted this. Some of these people happened to leave around that time. Maybe it was because of that stuff, but not because they are perverts or bad people. Some of them are. Again, that's why I don't like that he's mixed the two, but okay.
The company bled high-quality developers and talent rapidly. In Blizzard's earning report for investors, they clearly stated that it has become apparent that some of the Blizzard content planned for the next year will benefit from more development time to reach its full...
So yeah, that point, solid point. But yeah, just to clarify, some people were let go because of allegations against them, and then other talent bled away for potentially other reasons. But there was a big drain. This is true. A lot of, I mean, over time. But I think it really came to a head. So slowly over time, a lot of Blizzard veterans left the company. And it was around this time, it was kind of the last big exodus of some of the last of the old guard and a lot of the most veteran talent at Blizzard.
And Blizzard did what they do best. Feed and prey off the nostalgia of previous games from their fans. The nostalgia of the great times this company once had. They went down the line and re-released titles of all their beloved games. Classic World of Warcraft, which led to what is now the re-release of the Wrath of the Lich King. Warcraft Reforged, which was a convoluted disaster. And finally, Diablo 2 Resurrected.
That was a win.
They knew that by releasing these games, it would make them hundreds of millions of dollars and give them more time to try and develop something new that the fans would come to love once again. But time and time after, they fail to follow through with that promise and always come up short. With the new day and age of Blizzard's monetization, where they squeeze everything they can take, it finally took its toll. Classic era of World of Warcraft having expansion pack passes, character boosts, and now a new WoW token across expansions where you can literally buy gold with real life money.
Hasn't WoW been overly monetized for a long time? Is that a new thing, or is it just this new to WoW classic, I guess? Maybe that's what it is. But like, you've been able to spend real money to buy gold. Like, I feel like people don't talk about this enough, but WoW is by far Blizzard's most over-monetized franchise and has been for the longest time, right? There's so many different ways where they can get people to spend money.
Overwatch 2 being a copy of Overwatch 1 with egregious monetization and broken
Overwatch
promises of new content and story that never came to light. Warcraft Reforged being a
what a sad story. I mean, seeing now, in retrospect, after seeing Overwatch 2, it makes sense why Papa Jeff left. To go from what was promised to where we are. Wow. I think Overwatch is actually maybe the saddest story of Blizzard. They out of nowhere revealed this new franchise, and it was an instant hit. It was a global phenomenon. Do you remember back when Overwatch released, everyone was talking about this. Everyone was playing it. And then just nothing's been done with it, and now, you know, Overwatch 2. I mean, when Overwatch 2 was first promised to be this whole story expansion, everyone was hyped for that. And now there's just none of those promises are delivered on.
Skin with even more broken promises. At this point in time, it seems as if the company continues to make the wrong decisions based on greed and simply takes advantage of its player base across every game they've ever developed. There
definitely was, over time, increasing influence from Activision to make more money. When Activision first merged with Blizzard / acquired Blizzard, Blizzard was at its heyday. WoW was making tons of money. It was the golden goose, and I'm sure Activision let Blizzard just do its thing. They knew that, hey, things are going well, we're not going to mess with the winning formula. But then what happens? Over time, Blizzard's revenue numbers are dropping. Numbers are going down, and so what do the Activision execs do when they see numbers going down? Well, they start to get more involved, and they start to apply more pressure, and they start to squeeze. And as that's happening, people at Blizzard who just want to make games and want to make games that are fun and not make money machines, they start to leave. Maybe they try to fight, and they fight for some time, but eventually they're squeezed out, and Bobby starts appointing his lieutenants within Blizzard. We see this happening. He started instilling, you know, people he knew as like into executive positions within Blizzard to start implementing cost-cutting measures and finding ways to trim. I don't think it's fair to say trim fat, to save money and make more money, and more pressure is being applied.
No choice. The only thing we can do now is hope that Diablo 4 doesn't follow this sad and beat down pattern. And for many others, including myself, this would be Blizzard's last chance at repairing what is a betrayed and broken relationship between us and what used to be a magical company.
So, that's very true. A lot of people... D4 was the chance at redemption.
Stop holding out hope that Blizzard is going to come back.
This is a former Blizzard designer, in case you're not reading the text up here.
Everyone who founded Blizzard, all the principles that Blizzard was founded on, are dead. They've been desecrated. Let Blizzard go. That's...
The people aren't dead. To clarify, they left the company. They're not dead. The principles are dead. The people just left.
My main message is let Blizzard go. Appreciate what was created back when it was done. Stop holding out hope that it's gonna come back, because it's not.
In August of 2022, Blizzard announced their Diablo 4 alpha playtest, running for friends and family of Blizzard employees. Jason Schreier, a Bloomberg reporter, states on Twitter, "A bunch of people are playing an early build of Diablo 4 right now thanks to a friends and family alpha test. These players are under NDA, but I'm hearing mostly positive buzz." Schreier also...
Okay, so there was apparently mostly positive buzz in summer 2022.
Also noted that there are no microtransactions in the alpha build.
Well, of course.
So players won't have much of an idea what to expect from monetization. Although, Blizzard has previously confirmed that small Diablo 4 purchases will be cosmetic only, aside from larger story expansions. Months later, the Diablo 4 endgame beta invites go out in October of 2022, and the playtest officially begins. The playtest itself gave lucky testers a chance...
And a bunch of leaks happened from there. A bunch of people breaking NDA during the endgame beta.
To go up against Lilith in the post-campaign Sanctuary and test out Diablo 4's endgame modes and instances. This included the Whispers of the Dead system, the progressively challenging Nightmare dungeons, region-wide Hell Tides, the Fields of Hatred PvP, and the Paragon board progression system. This was the...
So it's basically everything that did end up making it into the endgame at launch.
The only endgame test they hosted before launch with enough time to make changes. And this is going to...
Yeah, that was, what, 8 months out about?
be important and a big conversation topic later. A couple months after that, a massive article comes out on the Washington Post stating that Diablo 4 developers are working overtime to meet the release deadline, and it also includes their own staff, stating there is mismanagement and disturbing script changes that might contribute to delays. It's a process that's been plagued by mismanagement and employees being promised perks for working late evenings and weekends outside of regular work hours.
Something maybe worth noting, he might go into this at some point, but amongst the people that left during the allegations, the top two people in D4, the game director left or was let go, and the lead game designer. So the game director and the lead game designer both left. This was in 2021. It does seem as though it was promotions from within that filled those positions, but nonetheless, I mean, you know, 2 years before launch, you remove the top two, the director and designer on the project. There's going to be some consequences there.
They described a mounting sense of dissatisfaction and malice amongst employees as they endured leadership change constantly, and that the Diablo team has been losing talent for over a year as employees look for more competitive wages and better work conditions elsewhere. Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick attributed the company's stock price drop to the game delay of Diablo 4 and Overwatch 2 rather than the ongoing sexual harassment lawsuit filed against the company in July.
True. I mean, it's more if you don't release games, yeah, your stock goes down.
Of 2021. He quotes, "I think what affected the stock price more than the sexual harassment investigation is pushing out the release dates of Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4.
People don't play the stock market based on morality."
His comments frustrated some of the company's developers who felt he was blaming them unfairly, stating, "We felt very much like he just drove the bus over on top of us." As you could see, the relationship and chemistry within the company seems to begin crumbling. A person familiar with senior leadership found the performance shares unnecessary and even destructive, arguing that they incentivize leadership to cut corners, compromise, and ship products that are not ready to be released instead of doing what is the best thing for the long-term value creation.
Bobby Kotick is exceptionally talented at making money. And it seems to be a no matter the cost attitude. Well, not financial cost, but Bobby Kotick seems perfectly fine with driving something into the ground as long as they milk every penny out of it. And that's kind of the issue with the stock market, publicly traded companies. All this, I mean, you can argue capitalism in general. It's always focusing on short-term gains because long-term investments don't keep him in the CEO seat, right? If you invest into the long term, but you're not making short-term profits, your numbers are going down. And what do the shareholders say, or the stockholders say? Like, well, hey, under your watch, numbers are going down. And we don't care if you're going to make profit in 10 years. We want our money now. So we're voting you out and voting in someone who's going to make us money. Bobby's probably in a position where he can't get ousted like that. But just in general, that's kind of what happens in capitalism. It's a literally unsustainable model where you always have to be making profit. You cannot make profit year after year without fail. Quick note, I used the wrong word here. You can show profit every year. What I meant was growth. If you're not seeing sustained growth, if you're not seeing the stock price go up year after year. You cannot go to a shareholder meeting and say, okay guys, for the next 5 years, we're going to operate at a loss because we're heavily investing into the future. Everyone's going to just immediately sell their shares.
Employees state they just went to work every day and got angry, either because the tools were slow or they simply did not like the game that much. Oof. They also stated that...
So this is from Blizzard Albany. So Blizzard Albany, they made Diablo 2 Resurrected. They were Vicarious Visions, renamed to Blizzard Albany in the same way that Condor Games was renamed to Blizzard North. Condor Games made Diablo, Diablo 1, Diablo 2, and Vicarious Visions became Blizzard Albany. They made Diablo 2 Resurrected, which, again, cannot stress enough how fantastic Diablo 2 Resurrected turned out to be.
That it wasn't just employees that left, it was many with institutional knowledge and decades of experience, leaving brand new employees and developers brought in from elsewhere to fill in. Diablo 4's unannounced internal release date went from 2021 to December of 2022, then got pushed back further to April 2023, and then finally June of 2023. A former employee stated, "We're at the point where they're not willing to delay the game anymore. So we all just have to go along and figure out how much we're willing to hurt ourselves to make sure the game gets released in a good enough state."
Now, so this is bad, but this is endemic of the AAA industry. This is not just Blizzard, this is literally every company. Every company has crunch. It's a major problem in the industry, and pretty much every game is, launch it good enough, hope to have a good day one patch. Not a justification, but explanation that this is endemic, largely, of the AAA industry.
On March 1st, they released a video showing the gameplay trailer for the beta early access of Diablo 4, announcing that you could play the game on March 17th through March 19th if you pre-purchase the $90 Digital Deluxe or $100 Ultimate Edition of the game. The $100 Ultimate Edition gives you the advantage to play up to 4 days early over everyone else. The
I didn't like that. I was never in favor. I don't like being able to pay for early access. The saving grace here was that there was no competitive ladder, and that most competitive players want to wait for Season 1 to really treat the game kind of seriously. But you have a game that has trading in it. Yeah, people that get in early, they're going to have a head start. They're going to have a head start towards the world firsts, right? Some people care about that world first stuff. Yeah, I was never on board with paying for early access.
The early access weekend for Diablo 4 arrived, and the game was in the hands of the public, allowing you to go up to level 25. This weekend was only available to players who have pre-ordered the Digital Deluxe Edition, and you could play as the Barbarian, Rogue, or Sorcerer. It only allows you to play through Diablo 4's prologue.
I feel like the betas went generally well and were generally well received.
In one zone, and that is Fractured Peaks. Once again, no endgame testing.
True.
At first, the servers were plagued with horrendous queue times and error codes. A simple explanation is that there is a repeating cycle going on where players would sit in a sometimes over hour-long queue, finally get logged into the game, to only then get disconnected and be put back in an even longer queue after about 5 to 10 minutes.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's what these things are for, right? It's to test the servers, and this testing ended up paying off because at D4's launch, things were relatively smooth server-wise. All the issues that we had, that we went through in the betas, like, when the game actually launched, all things considered, I think D4 was like Blizzard's smoothest launch ever, at least in recent history.
Minutes of playing. This continued through most of the night until Blizzard put out a patch that seemingly fixed the problem. This angered many people because they spent additional money to play that said early access weekend, and it started to raise some eyebrows in the community. Overall, though, from a gameplay perspective, people were relatively happy with Diablo 4 as a game so far.
True.
But of course, there were concerns, and there were a few in particular that stood out to the community. And like a dagger coated in poison, issues that seemingly never went away. Some of these include that there isn't anything in Diablo 4 that's redefining what an ARPG can be. Tedious grinds that you're forced to do and aren't even fun the first time, including Renown, Altars of Lilith, waypoints, and instead of it being fun challenges, it was simply a Google search to find the location and run around and collect them all. The UI across the board needed work, being forced to play online and having no offline mode worried player bases about server stability, and it felt like Diablo 4 wasn't created with the same heart as Diablo 1 and 2 were. Little did they—
Well, I mean, how could it? It's not the same people.
No, it only got much worse moving forward. The open beta weekend arrived, allowing everybody openly to play the game, and all 5 classes up to level 25. Immediately, players are noticing the difference in power between the Druid and the Necromancer. And
True. Yes. Early game balance was all over the board. Druids were very underpowered.
Coming to the conclusion that classes like the Barbarian and the Druid lag behind significantly in terms of kill speed, unlike the other classes leveling. The balance was so bad about the Druid that memes were being made, and the class was nothing but a laughingstock.
For 17 damage.
Yeah, that's why I was always in favor of ensuring that even at early game, all the classes are balanced equally. Or, at the very least, have some indicator when you're selecting a class that, you know, will rate them difficulty-wise, or give something like, hey, this class is weak early game but becomes really strong late game. Just because I think it's a bad player first experience if you take a druid and your buddy takes like a necromancer, and you're playing together and you see your necro buddy obliterating enemies and you're struggling and you're like, man, I'm really bad at this game. What bad choices did I make? And the bad choice you made was picking druid. I don't think that's a good first player experience.
Key features such as the gem tab, skill loadouts, more bank storage, inventory filters, and more quality of life features that are widely seen across gaming. Between the issues with the early access and open beta weekends, players are starting to believe that the game is poorly developed and there is a lot of fine-tuning that needs to be done. Other than that, the base game of combat animations and story seemed good enough for now. After the open beta weekends, the official Diablo team releases the Into the Endgame developer update video, breaking down everything the game has to offer once you reach the end game, and developers made incredibly bold promises that were sadly never delivered upon.
Brand new activities that provide meaningful progression, no matter their playstyle.
There's going to never be an absence of something.
I'm trying to think. Brand new activities. I guess he's talking about the Nightmare Dungeons, right? They provide progression you can't get elsewhere. But that's one. Okay, Helltide technically was also a brand new activity. Well, okay, so I guess you can argue, well, Nightmare Dungeons aren't brand new activities because you're just redoing dungeons. They're harder, but it's the same mechanics, right? You can argue it's the same mechanics, so calling it a brand new activity, sure, okay. I guess similarly with Helltide. No, well, Helltide, you are doing something new. You're collecting the things, right? Maybe what you're doing in Helltide is still just killing monsters and doing events, but you are picking up the cinders, right? That is a new activity, and you're getting progression, or at least at launch you were getting progression in Helltide that you couldn't quite get elsewhere. Well, actually, no, it wasn't progression. No, it was items, right? So you get crafting materials. It's not that Helltide gives you any kind of progression that you can't get elsewhere. That really is just Nightmare Dungeons where you level up your glyphs.
There's going to never be an absence of something to do.
I mean, technically true. There's always something to do. That's true. You might not want to do it, but there's always something to do.
War is a place where we're allowed to have a lot more depth, a lot more customization, many more options as you go. There's over 120 dungeons to play through and find in Diablo 4, and any one of them can become a Nightmare Dungeon.
We later found out that this was simply not true, being that there was only...
Okay, yeah. In a season, it's a limited selection, yeah.
Roughly 20 Nightmare Dungeons in a rotation at a time, forcing you to do the same ones over and over again. A few days later,
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. So, I had asked, when I was at Blizzard HQ and we did the live stream, I asked why, you know, just that selection, as opposed to letting every dungeon become a Nightmare Dungeon, and I believe the answer given was in order to have a rotation, or to keep things fresh, basically season to season. And I wasn't fully sold on the answer, but now that I see how the game is played, where it's like, well, here's a tier list of, among those 20, only run these 5 dungeons. Now it's like, okay, in that context, it makes sense. Rotate the dungeons, because if we always had all 120 dungeons available, then it's literally the same 5 dungeons every season forever. Whereas if you're rotating it, at least the top 5 within those selection will change. There might be better ways of addressing that, which would be rebalancing the dungeons, but the reality is, if you're not a meta chaser, yeah, like once you're in endgame, there's no reason to do dungeons other than Nightmare Dungeons, except maybe if you're doing a Whisper, but yeah, for the most part, you're ignoring, you know, 100 dungeons and only running 20 of them every season.
The Diablo 4 team announces they are making significant changes to character classes, dungeon design, UI changes, and more. This leaves people very excited that the developers are listening to player feedback and are excited for the future. Through the last few months before launch, the Diablo 4 developers assure us that they're going back to their roots of Diablo 2.
Well, the initial direction was Diablo 2.
The fantasy of a dark, gothic medieval world.
Darker and grittier, and Diablo 2 was kind of the inspiration.
We wanted to bring Diablo 4 artistically more back towards like Diablo 2.
Have we heard?
It's so I feel that they did even more towards Diablo 1. I wish that in addition to tone, they had also brought more strongly itemization back to Diablo 2. I feel that Diablo 2's itemization system, while not perfect, I think the framework of D2's itemization is fantastic. And I think every ARPG that has great itemization used Diablo 2's framework, and every ARPG that does not have great itemization did not use Diablo 2's framework. So I really wish that D4 had more strongly used D2's framework for itemization.
Heard this story before? Is this something that Blizzard is doing once again to tug on our nostalgia? Is history going to repeat itself like it did?
I don't think it's about tugging on nostalgia. I think it's giving the people what they want. I mean, people were overwhelmingly wanting things to go in that direction.
Warcraft Reforged, Overwatch, and World of Warcraft Classic. The only thing left to do now is hope what they say is true and await launch day. Before you know it, the internet is absolutely slammed with Diablo 4 marketing. They also announced the Diablo 4 hardcore leveling competition, where the first 1,000 users to reach level 100 on hardcore will be...
Yeah, that was another thing that I wasn't really in favor of, given the unfairness of people having the head start, some people having had early access to the game, including the endgame testers from back in, October or whenever it was, fall of 2022. Sure, changes might have been made, but they have more experience with the game than anyone else. I really thought that this should have happened for Season 1. It would have been the most fair to do it for Season 1, but of course, I mean, it doesn't align with having the major hype on launch. I understand from a marketing perspective doing it at launch, but I really think it would have been best to wait for Season 1.
Eligible to have their battle tag engraved on a physical statue of Lilith on the Blizzard campus. On June 1st of 2023, the early access launch of Diablo 4 finally arrived. It doesn't matter too much how amazing a game is or even how well received it is. Shareholders, executives, and accountants want to know how well a game is selling.
And it's sold.
They revealed that in
very
just
well.
5 days, sales of Diablo 4 had surpassed $666 million in revenue.
And to clarify though, what in 5 days includes the 6 months before that, right? So whenever they talk about how much something sells within the first 5 days of launch, they're including all the pre-sales.
Estimating nearly 10 million game copies sold, not even including the additional microtransactions so heavily apparent inside the game. In corporate eyes, Diablo 4 was booming, and it was nothing short of a monumental success. It became officially Blizzard's fastest selling game of all time.
Yes.
So, Activision Blizzard...
So Diablo 3 it was sold incredibly well, but when it launched, it just launched on PC. So D4 launched across all platforms at the same time, which really helped to boost those sales as well.
Was back on top, right? Well, that statement couldn't have been more untrue. Shortly after launch, the internet was flooded with reviews about Diablo 4. The early game, being relatively good from a gameplay perspective, quickly dissipated as people headed into the end game. Because the truth is, Diablo 4 had no innovation and nothing truly creative toward the ARPG genre. And Blizzard simply took no risks. Tree of Whispers are the same thing as bounties from Diablo 3. They kept the same generic gambling systems. Paragon boards are just stolen content from Path of Exile and Vulcan. Nightmare dungeons are just riffs from Diablo.
Are Paragon boards? Yeah, okay. Sort of. Yeah, sort of like Wolfson's skill tree. I do agree that overall, Diablo 4 is not very innovative. Like, I think everything in D4 you could probably have found somewhere in some other game. Now, a game doesn't need to be innovative in order to be a good game, as long as it's taking existing ideas and executing them at a superlative level. I do feel the biggest thing that D4 does is have this open world. It's not the first ARPG to have an open world, which is why I can't call it an innovation per se, but at least it is something that it's doing drastically different than most of the other ARPGs that are popular these days. I always saw that as the singular differentiating factor of D4. Like, how is it being different? And it's this shared open world. That was the one thing that made it really different from what else is out there. Again, not the first ARPG to do an open world, but it's not common these days.
Boards are just stolen content from Path of Exile and Vulcan. Nightmare dungeons are just riffs from Diablo 3. The new free choice leveling is the same thing as Diablo 3's adventure mode. Nothing here was brand new.
Yeah, so all those things like taken from D3, they're improved from D3, but yeah, like the easiest way to explain these systems to someone who played D3 is to just relate them to D3 systems.
Or innovative. It was the same reused and recycled content, and fans were simply bored of it within a few weeks' time. The most common mistake we see from games with lack of endgame presence is they make the grind to max level longer, so it gives them time to come up with something new. And what did Blizzard do? Exactly just that. One by one, they were going across the board and nerfing dungeon farms to permit anyone from leveling too quickly from specific dungeons. And when that wasn't enough, they completely nerfed elite mob density across the board.
Alright, so on the topic of XP grind, I have an unpopular opinion here. I am totally fine with it taking rather long to reach 100. To reach max level. In Diablo 2 and in Path of Exile, where the level cap is 99, it is not an expectation that you reach max level. The vast majority of players never reach max level and are fine with that. They'll like hit level 90 plus a bit. It takes quite a bit of time to get there, and people generally don't complain or they don't criticize these games for it taking long to reach max level. And so I don't think it's a problem necessarily in D4 that it takes long to reach level 100. The game doesn't start at level 100, or at least it shouldn't. I think the reason that it might be problematic that it takes long to reach level 100 in D4 is due to other things, which he might be getting to. But them nerfing XP and how long it would take to reach 100 wasn't them like desperately trying to buy time. It's just that we have in mind that it would take X amount of time to reach 100. People have found ways to do it in 1/10 of the time. Ergo, we need to do some rebalances. In my opinion, the problem is, and the reason why people complain about it taking so long, is a couple of factors. And probably the major contributor there is that after about level 70 is when we tend to see a lot of drop-off in players. And it's just because I feel the itemization system isn't interesting enough to keep people engaged. And while D4 did launch with more endgame content than any other ARPG has ever launched with. Any other launched ARPG to this date has had less endgame content at its launch than D4 has had at its launch. There's still not enough to keep people engaged in the long term. Now that said, right, Diablo 2 had no endgame content, but Diablo 2 just had a really robust itemization system that even if you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over, the itemization system is just so interesting that the loot chase is all that you need to drive you. And I feel that the itemization and the loot in D4 just isn't exciting enough for us to ignore the other things. So what happens is you reach level 70, and now everything has slowed down. It's taking long to reach level 100. It's effectively repeating the same activities over and over, right? The most rewarding thing right now is doing nightmare dungeons, so you're doing that over and over. And the loot system doesn't have a lot of very exciting moments or interesting moments with it. So now that the game has slowed down drastically, all of a sudden you're able to see the cracks in the different systems, and you don't have that like really robust itemization to make you able to ignore the fact that there isn't like a million different endgame activities and all these other things.
One of the most fun aspects of the game. Instead of buffing the lackluster dungeons that were boring and slow, they nerfed the fun ones. They continued to do this with nearly everything in the game moving forward. Build diversity was the same result. Across all classes, you could see a clear-cut pattern in people using the same exact builds over and over again. Instead of buffing weak abilities to bring them in line with the strong ones, they simply nerfed the abilities that were performing too well, making everything feel boring. And with the price of recost and the non-existent...
I know people feel different ways about this. I've always been a believer in nerfing, not just buffing, because I lived through Diablo 3. At the start of Diablo 3, the devs would buff and nerf things. If things were really strong and OP, they would bring down their power. And of course, no one enjoys taking medicine. Everyone is upset whenever nerfs happen. So after a couple of years of that, the remaining D3 devs were like, fine, you guys are always complaining about nerfs. We're not going to nerf things anymore. Only buffs from now on to underperforming stuff forever. Hooray! And what happens? Power creep, power creep, power creep, power creep. We have items today in Diablo 3 that give you 40,000% more damage, because that is what unfettered buffing and never nerfing does. Feels great for a season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons. After 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, numbers are absolutely bonkers out of control. You gotta have nerfs in addition to buffs. But that's the key there, right? Nerfs and buffs. You look at the stuff that's way overperforming, you bring that down. You look at the stuff that's underperforming, you bring that up. It's always going to be an iterative process. Players are always going to find, there's just a million different combinations of things in the game, and players trying to find ways to break it in different ways. That having perfect balance, especially at launch, is impossible. So it's about, okay, every time, every season, readjusting the numbers, readjusting. And it's okay if over time the average level of power rises slightly. Like Path of Exile has achieved a really good system whereby I think they allow for 15% power creep per season, is I think what they had said. So with compounding interest, I think that's like 2 years before you're dealing double damage, as opposed to like, 40,000% more damage. And I know everyone's like, but it feels fun to be on this broken build that obliterates the hardest content in the game in 30 seconds. Yes, that feels great for 2 weeks. And then it's like, this game's too easy. There's nothing to do. I've defeated everything instantly. But again, nerfs are always going to be unpopular. It's to be expected. You can't expect people to ever feel good about getting nerfed. So generally, people will be more willing to accept that if they're otherwise having a good time, if there's otherwise good stuff to be happy about and to celebrate. But if it's just a whole lot of negativity across the board and then you're getting nerfs, yeah, yikes. I can understand that getting rolled into a whole host of other issues.
Existence of skill loadouts or a dual specialization system in play, it was too risky to constantly be testing out and theory crafting new builds. It was too tedious.
That's another point as well. So anytime they do a balance change, they should give us a free respec. Yeah, this is very fair. You build a game where you don't have free respec, where you're expected to stay on the same build and keep empowering your character, and then you're like nerfing things, and now the player is on a build that doesn't work anymore, and now they have to spend potentially millions of gold to respec to try to have a better build. I would prefer that if you nerf something, you give people a free respec. It's not the player's fault. Why are they being punished for this?
Is to respec hundreds of Paragon points manually one by one and flat out too expensive. Having to grind out countless legendary aspects, uniques, and perfect affix rolls on every piece of gear was something that took too much time. By this time, players were reaching level 65 plus, and the level pacing drastically slowed down, and so did the excitement of good loot rewards as well.
So the problem with Diablo 4 is that after you spend about 80 hours into the game, all of the gear upgrades that you can get are so minimal, there's nothing else to do.
So the time it took to level vastly increased, and the rewards and purpose for leveling became so much smaller. It's very obvious to everybody now that Diablo 4 has no endgame, and it...
Yeah, you got a couple characters to 70 plus, that's really all the game has to offer right now. In case I've not made myself clear, so I think the campaign is really fun. I think it's the most robust campaign we've ever seen, possibly in any Blizzard game. Best story. I think it's really fun to get all the way up to level 50, even all the way up to level 70. It's once you're past 70, the further you get past 70, the more bored you get. But for me, that journey up to that point is really enjoyable. But yeah, as of right now, beyond level 70, I lose motivation.
It was heavily front-loaded. The minor endgame testing, mixed with the constant changing of development teams, and major lack of inexperience and workplace professionalism, was finally starting to take its toll. It became too difficult to manage storage inside of a full loot ARPG game. Between gems, legendaries, and aspects, rare items...
So, one issue that I have, I think... okay. I still have fun with the core gameplay post level 70. Like just going around killing monsters on my rogue, like I still love the playstyle. But what becomes tedious for me is the loot and inventory management. It's that I'm going, like, I almost begrudge the loot system. We have very limited stash space. We have this entire itemization system that's designed around having rare items that you upgrade with legendary aspects. So I have to look at every single legendary drop to see if it has an aspect that I need, right? I can't ignore any. I have to check to see if it has that legendary aspect. So I'm holding on to that, then I'm extracting good aspects, and I only have a limited stash space of aspects. So then if I have too many aspects, then I have to be like, okay, which are my worst aspects? I'm going to get rid of those, replace them with my best aspects. Then just gear-wise, okay, for every itemization slot, I have to pick up items, unless I ever get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is my best in slot. I no longer have to look at boots because I got my unique boots. Thank goodness. That's like the best feeling. That's the best, literally the best feeling when I don't have to pick up any more boots. The best feeling isn't that I got my item, it's that I don't have to look at boots anymore. But yeah, so I have to pick up and look at every rare item, and then with all these myriad of affixes, I have to like cross-reference, okay, do I need this stat here? And then it's like, okay, wait, now on this item, which of my aspects can I put? How can I juggle around my aspects? So it feels tedious to have to like cross-reference between the items that I have and the items that I'm picking up and the aspects. And that's all just for one build. I've given up holding gear for multiple characters or multiple builds. And I'm someone who normally, in every game, like, I want to have a bunch of alts. I just want to have one of every character, and it's just not feasible. It's just not possible. I did make one of every character, but I basically would just, okay, I'm done with this character. I'm going to get rid of all their stuff in the stash to make room for stuff for my other character now.
Uniques, inventory was quickly flooded within minutes of grinding out a single dungeon, and players demanded more room for their other characters. When Blizzard finally responded over a month later, they stated they couldn't add more because it creates a lot of memory overhead. When you see another player in game, you load them and their entire stash filled with all of their items. Things like a gem tab, leaderboard, stash tabs, loot filters, ability loadouts, all announced to be added in future expansions, sometimes as far as 6 months to a year from now. Only half of your renown carried over, and half of the brand new content and class changes in Season 1 was locked to the seasonal realms and was forbidden on the eternal realms. Meaning,
I think that's fine. This is not an appeal to tradition. This is how it's done in ARPGs. I'm not saying just because it's done this way, this is how it should be done, but it's done this way and it works and people like it this way. That when there's a new season, that there's some kind of new seasonal mechanic. Path of Exile does it, it's very successful in Path of Exile. D3 does it, it's very successful in D3. This is how we do it in modern ARPGs. It was developed for modern ARPGs, and it works in modern ARPGs. So I think it's totally fine for the seasonal content to be in the season. There's a lot of good reasons for that. I have a whole video where I go over those reasons. I know still some people would like the content on non-seasonal, and that is totally fine to want that. I just don't think it's a fair criticism when this is how every other game is doing it, and they're not getting criticized for it.
That if you wanted all of these brand new changes and updates, you had to start all over and create a whole new character. You were then forced to go on to seasonal realms, and players were quickly flooded with additional monetization. By this point, players were at their limit. Metacritic scores plummeted, and the population slowly dwindled down to nothing within a week of Season 1 being launched. And with the final nail in the coffin, Larian Studios released Baldur's Gate 3 on August 3rd of 2023. Easily being the frontrunner for the Game of the Year, it knocked Diablo 4 out. The game had longer replayability, no egregious monetization, good developers, better RPG aspects, innovative design with stable servers and a real character creator, and gameplay sections with freedom of choice throughout your entire playthrough. Most of these things Blizzard used to take pride in, but those days are now over. A game that just a few...
So to clarify here, Baldur's Gate 3, phenomenal game. The implication is not that people stop playing D4 to play Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 did not kill D4. Baldur's Gate 3 is just a phenomenal game. It's not like D4 would be doing amazingly now if Baldur's Gate 3 hadn't released.
Months ago, had a population of almost 7 million concurrent active players at once, has now lost more than 99% of its total population and is shrinking more.
That's not, so again, that's not, he's making up a statistic there. There's no basis for that number. I'm not disagreeing with the conclusion that the player numbers have dropped catastrophically, but it's exceptionally misleading to give an actual number on player counts. You can say viewership has dropped 99.6%. That is fair. Again, assuming that's where that number is, but there's no way we have actual player numbers. No way Blizzard would give us the player numbers on how bad D4 is doing. They just don't give player numbers, period.
More and more by the day. So what was the exact cause of Diablo 4's failure? Was it the constant change in development teams before launch day?
That certainly did not help, right? I mean, it is normal over the course of a game that is being developed for 5-10 years that there will be turnover, right? You can't expect every employee to stick with a company for 5 to 10 years. That said, again, the top 2 people were exited from the company late into development, but not towards the very end. So with a good 2 years left to go. So I'm sure any game would be negatively impacted by that. It is true that there seems to have been a higher rate of turnover within Blizzard during those tumultuous times, which again, I'm sure did not help. This is also during the lockdowns as well. A whole host of things contributing there did not help. And again, a fact that a lot of the senior Blizzard employees, veterans within the team, within the company, left as well. That's not to say that the new people are not talented or that they're not capable, but they're different people. You can't expect even Van Gogh to paint a Rembrandt. It's just not going to come out the same.
The loss of key figures within the company due to the allegations and walkouts, developers disliking the game they're creating, and the increased malice between leaders and company team members.
I highly believe that the majority of Blizzard employees probably have a negative opinion of Bobby Kotick, which is why I think the Microsoft acquisition, which is going through, seems like it should be a really good thing for the company.
Was it the constant delays, the microtransactions being forced onto players, or is it just the simple...
I think in the grand scheme of things, the cosmetic shop is like the least of D4's problems.
Simple fact that Blizzard...
They're not forced on, like, at least there was no pay to win, right? Everyone, or, you know, a lot of things like, oh yeah, you can't trust Blizzard, they're gonna add pay to win. At least there was no pay to win, right? You can say the cosmetics are expensive, sure. But pricey optional cosmetics is not the reason people have stopped playing D4.
Has completely lost its touch, and the era of this once King of Kings is now over. No one really knows exactly. But one thing...
I mean, Blizzard hasn't been Blizzard for a long time, is the reality. When Blizzard came together, it was one thing. And after its meteoric success with World of Warcraft, it exploded in size and it grew and it grew and it grew. And I mean, just over the years, right? It evolved into something different. It couldn't stay the same unless it had stayed those same people. But yeah, at least for a time, sure, there still was the old guard in place to sort of steward in the new employees. But then again, the company continues to grow. People retire, people leave, and Blizzard. And this isn't necessarily a criticism, or it doesn't have to be a criticism. Blizzard has just remained Blizzard in name. It's, you know, 99.999% all different people today than it was 20 years ago. Okay, 99.9 is probably an exaggeration. Maybe 99? 95? For me, Mike Morhaime leaving was the biggest blow. I mean, there'd been a lot of heavy blows for me, but Mike Morhaime, I mean, he was Blizzard. So we can't expect these new employees to be old Blizzard. The best that we can hope for is that they are going to be good stewards of these franchises that we care about.
Is for sure. No game in history has had almost 7 million concurrent active players at one time, and within a couple months, get reduced down to less than 40,000 active players throughout the entire...
What are the sources on this?
...day.
Where is he pulling these numbers? Altogether, this video has been phenomenal. Production value is amazing. Really well constructed video. This is why I'm being so nitpicky on certain things, because it could have been a perfect video. I don't like throwing around statistics with no backing, right? Anytime you put out a number, source. And the reason there's no source is because there is no source. This is not a real statistic. He's pulling some number that is not actually player counts. And it's a shame because it's distracting and it's taking away from an otherwise really solid argument. And again, I keep stressing this because I know people are going to be like, well, Rhykker, obviously all the players are dead. Yeah, we're not questioning the conclusion. I agree the numbers are down dramatically. It's like if you say that Jupiter has the most moons in the solar system because it's the biggest planet with the most gravity, and I say, well, that's not true. And you're like, what? It doesn't have the most moons? And I'm like, well, it does have the most moons, just not necessarily for the reason you stated.
A 99.4% loss in player base count. This is why Diablo 4 is the biggest disappointment in recent gaming history. Hopefully heading into 2024, they can bring loads of improvements into the game and maybe flip the script on this whole situation. Maybe, just maybe, we can have a solid ARPG to play. But just remember, the new Path of Exile is on its way, and it could very well be too late. Have you played Diablo 4? What are your thoughts and feelings? What do you think is the biggest mistake they made? Let me know in the comment section below.
Yeah, alright, so overall I think a very well researched video, brought up a lot of good past and history of things that have happened. Again, couple places where I feel like he's kind of throwing numbers out there just with having a specific agenda. But overall, I don't think he too grossly misrepresents anything. All indications, as far as we can see from the outside, is that numbers are down substantially. I'll just add on top of what has been said here, maybe along the lines of what was the biggest mistake they made. One bit of frustration that I get with D4 is that I feel that there are lessons that were learned in Diablo 3, and those lessons are not carried over into Diablo 4. And it makes me wonder, why? Was it because they didn't have the time to do it? You know, simple things like the mystic re-rolling things, right? Like, we had a functional system in D3, and then there's sort of a step back in D4. And there's little things like this, or sometimes even bigger things, in different areas where it's like, you guys already learned this. Like, we went through this lesson. Why do we have to do this again now? Sometimes it's about things where it's like, trying to reinvent the wheel rather than just using something that worked. Again, like the baseline itemization of Diablo 2, which, again, you know, PoE, Last Epoch, a lot of other ARPGs with robust itemization, right? The core is D2's itemization. It's evolved, it's expanded. Last Epoch and PoE both evolve off that in different directions, and both in the case of Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, which I believe have weaker itemizations compared to these other games, there was this attempt at reinventing the core itemization of the ARPG. Not to say that I want to discourage trying to innovate, but it just feels like there's some things that just work well and you don't really need to try to reinvent, and there's room for other things to reinvent, things where things are weaker or lacking aspects of the game. I believe that Diablo 4 would benefit tremendously from the Diablo 3 treatment of like a loot 2.0, like a big overhaul of loot and itemization. I do have some high hopes for Season 2 bringing in more content and more a significant amount of improvements to the game. I don't know that it's going to be enough to bring people back in droves. I'm sure it'll make the game better. And I think a lot of people agree that in time, Diablo 4 will be excellent. It will have solved a lot of the issues that there are. I think the question is really just how long will it be? And of course, the excellent point here brought up of there is PoE 2 looming on the horizon. We're roughly a year away from the launch of PoE 2. I don't hate Diablo 4. I don't think it's a terrible game. I still enjoy playing it. I just wish I enjoyed playing it more than I currently do. And while I can see things that they can add on a seasonal basis that would make the game more enjoyable to me, I think the things that would really make this game perfect for me would require very substantial changes that can't be accomplished in a season. But again, folks, I encourage you to go visit the Comeback Kids, watch the video on his channel. I've omitted a bunch of content from the video. Very well produced. And in the meantime, leave your thoughts on all this. How are you feeling about Diablo 4? How are you feeling about what's been presented here? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Sound off in the comments. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.